Hello and welcome to the We Listen by Night podcast, a podcast devoted to the footnotes of and speculations about science fiction, fantasy and history, and I really ought to do more history. In this episode, we will explore an example of American science fiction dating from the Gilded Age, and we'll see how they believed the year 2000 would shape up. A Journey to Other Worlds, a Romance of the Future was written in 1894 by John Jacob Astor IV. It follows three American adventurers on a space trip to Jupiter and Saturn. Only these are not the Jupiter and Saturn we know today. No, these are the worlds of the late 19th century's popular imagination. Worlds with solid surfaces, with volcanoes and breathable air, strange creatures and the souls of the dead. And it is set not in the late Victorian era, but in a year 2000 dreamt up by the author. Trust me, this will be a very strange trip. The author. Who was Colonel John Jacob Astor IV? You may be surprised to discover that you might have seen actors portraying him on the small and big screen, for he was rather well known in his time. He had a net worth in US dollars of 87 million, or 2.83 billion US dollars in 2024 money. Colonel Astor was somewhat eccentric, a keen yachtsman who dabbled in mechanical engineering, even inventing a type of bicycle brake. From 1894, he held the rank of colonel while serving on the military staff of the governor of New York, and during the Spanish-American War he raised his own military unit. He was appointed a lieutenant colonel in the US Volunteers and was present during the Santiago campaign. At the time of his death, he owned so much real estate that it was said he owned most of the Manhattan skyline. He built the Astoria half of the Waldorf-Astoria hotel. The other half was owned by his cousin. The hotel was later demolished to make way for the Empire State Building. Ironically, the Waldorf-Astoria was the scene of the first inquiry into the sinking of the Royal Mail steamer Titanic in 1912. His family, the Astors, were one of the most wealthy families in the United States, and we might argue that they are still to be counted as in the club. Their influence has left their name writ large across the American map. The 1980s adventure film, The Goonies, was both filmed and set in Astoria, in Oregon, a town established by and named for John Jacob Astor I and the original. Their name and family tree runs deep. A branch of the Astor family entered the British aristocracy, and indeed, John Jacob Astor VIII is the third Baron Astor of Hever, and spent 36 years as a hereditary peer in the House of Lords. At the time of his death, Colonel Astor had scandalized polite American society by divorcing his wife and running off with a younger woman called Madeline Force. He subsequently married her and took her on a tour of Egypt to escape the press. Then he and his pregnant bride returned home, or at least she returned home, and he tried to return home, for the transatlantic passenger ship he boarded was the RMS Titanic, and Colonel John Jacob Astor IV, the richest man aboard and only 47 years of age, perished in her sinking. Regardless of how you view a rich man born into great wealth, there is no denying he was an interesting fellow. The novel. Astor's novel is 90,000 words in length, with a fleesh reading ease of 59. It is divided into 3 books, with 8, 14 and 15 chapters in books 1, 2 and 3 respectively. The first book starts with the arrival by the protagonists on the surface of Jupiter. It then goes back a good 6 months to relate the circumstances behind the voyage. The narrative timeline rejoins our explorers on the surface of Jupiter in Book 2, Chapter 5. The main characters are Richard Eralt, a wealthy young man with a fiancée studying for her degree, a government expert called Henry Chelmsford Ortland, a professor of geology and an astronomer, and Colonel Bearwarden, no, I'm not making this up, who is president of the Terrestrial Access Straightening Company, and I'm not making that up either. We begin over Jupiter and on a spacecraft called the Callisto. Callisto is the sort of craft that uses silk-covered glass handles as control levers. It uses a mysterious force called apogee, a controlled anti-gravity propulsive force, apogetic power. It's used to repel the surface of the Earth so the Callisto can rise into space, and then by the flip of a switch, the apogetic force can be reversed so to attract the Callisto towards first the Moon and then Jupiter. It is quite the innovation. Jules Verne used a big gun, H.G. Wells used cavorite, and Astor uses apogetic force. The author writes, "What transports of delight, what aesthetic bliss was theirs! Men had discovered and mastered the secret of apogee, and now, little lower than the angels, they could soar through space, leaving even planets and comets behind." The Jupiter of A Journey to Other Worlds is not a gas giant, but a large Earth-like planet. The idea that it might be a gas giant didn't really take hold until the 1930s. Our adventurers therefore find that beneath them was a vast continent variegated by chains of lakes and rivers stretching away in all directions except towards the equator, where lay a placid ocean as far as their telescopes could pierce. To the eastward were towering and massive mountains, and along the southern border of the continent smoking volcanoes, while toward the west they saw forests, gently rolling plains, and tablelands that would have satisfied a poet or set an agriculturalist's heart at rest. How I should like to mine those hills for copper, or drain the swamps to the south, exclaimed Colonel Bearwarden. The Lake Superior mines and the reclamation of the Florida Everglades would be nothing to this. Having arrived on Jupiter and made their initial tramp through the wilds and shot dead some strange leaping creature, they camp out for the brief night, at which point the author takes we, the reader, back 6 months to Earth, to the 21st of June AD 2000, and the offices of the Terrestrial Access Straightening Company. The first section of A Journey to Other Worlds concentrates on the world of the future, and it is a strange place. We will come to that shortly, but it is here in this first section that we get an explanation for this apogetic force. With this force, obtained by simply blending negative and positive electricity with electricity of the third element or state, and charging a body sufficiently with this fluid, gravitation is nullified or partly reversed, and the Earth repels the body with the same or greater power than that with which it still attracts or attracted it, so that it may be suspended or caused to move away into space. It seems there is a degree of boredom setting in though, even as the Terrestrial Access Straightening Company gets on with exactly what it says on the tin. Richard Erholtz expresses a wish to explore the solar system, and both Cordlant and Bearwarden agree. "I am convinced," said Bearwarden, "that we shall find Jupiter habitable for intelligent beings who have been developed on a more advanced sphere than itself, though I do not believe it has progressed far enough in its evolution to produce them. I expect to find it in its Paleozoic or Mesozoic period." Well over 100 years ago, the English astronomer Chambers thought that on Saturn there was good reason for suspecting the presence of snow. To achieve the journey, though, they first need a spacecraft, and that spacecraft, built in only a few months, is christened Callisto. The spacecraft Callisto. The Callisto is a cylinder 25 feet in diameter, 15 feet high, with polished sides and topped with a domed roof, which takes its height up to 21 feet. There is a gutter running around the dome to catch the rains of Jupiter. Someone should contact Elon Musk and suggest guttering for his rocket ship. I mean, imagine building a spaceship without external guttering. It's built out of geolucium. The sides, roof and floor consist of 2 sheets, each 1/3 of an inch thick and 6 inches apart. with the space between them filled with mineral wool to act as insulation against the intense cold of space. Several keels and supports are fitted underneath as landing struts. The windows in the roof and sides are of large toughened plate glass, with smaller ones set in the floor, and all are furnished with thick shades and curtains. I hope you're paying attention, Elon. The Callisto is divided into 2 stories with ceilings 6.5 to 7.5 feet high respectively, with a sort of crow's nest or observatory at the top. The floors are of lattice work, like the engine room of a steamer, so that when the carpets are rolled up, there would be an unrestricted view. The author notes, in addition to their medicine chest, they would have to make room for the following articles, and also many more: 6 shotguns, 3 double-barreled 12 bores, 3 magazine 10 bores, 3 rifles, 3 revolvers, a large supply of ammunition, explosive and solid balls, hunting knives, fishing tackle, compass, sextant, geometric instruments, canned food for 40 days, appliance for renewing air, clothing, rubber boots, apergetic apparatus, protection wires, aneroid barometer, and kodaks. You would think they were going on safari. The craft has 16 candle-power incandescent lamps and a good searchlight, and the Callisto even has a small chiming clock set in the internal woodwork which rings out the quarters. My word, it's like a gentleman's club inside. All it needs is a card table, a cloakroom, and a bar for serving port and brandy. As it is, there is 400 hours worth of electrical battery power for cooking, and their first meal is tinned chicken soup, beef à la jardinière, and pheasant. That's travelling in style. I bet the ISS crew don't get pheasant. Jupiter and Saturn. The Callisto is launched, and into the cold void of space it goes. The author describes its journeying thus: the apergetic force being applied, as we have seen, only to the Callisto, such as power in starting is exerted on a carriage or railway car, and only through it to the passengers, Hérold and his companions had no unusual sensation except loss of weight, for when they were so far from the Earth, its attraction was very slight, and no other planet was near enough to take its place. After breakfast, wishing to reach the dome, and realizing that it would be unnecessary to climb, each in turn gave a slight spring and was obliged to put up their hands to avoid striking the roof. In the cool quiet of the dark dome, it was difficult to believe that only 20 feet away the sun was shining with such intensity upon the metal base as to make it too hot on the inside to touch without gloves. The Callisto takes them past Mars, and the author resists mentioning canals, although he does give the planet seas and sudden seasonal changes due to its axial inclination. The Callisto passes close to a comet, and the author asserts that the word comet means hair. In the asteroid belt, Cortlandt talks of Pallas and Ceres, and mentions the theory, these days discounted, that the asteroid belt is the remains of a destroyed planet that once existed between Jupiter and Mars. Once on Jupiter, they hunt for game, and build a raft to cross a lake and kill some form of large mammoth or mastodon. As the spirit chaps shoot anything that moves. There are various creatures on this version of Jupiter, including the familiar boa constrictor and the unfamiliar jellyfish-like creature that can hover in the air and glow in the dark. Our remarkably fearless adventurers take a ride on the back of a giant tortoise and see dinosaurs, and discover bird-eating plants, witness an eclipse, and watch a fight between a woolly rhinoceros and a giant ant. This ant is enough to convince them to return to the safety of the Callisto. As the author writes, their strong metal house was securely at rest, receiving the sunlight and shedding the rain and dew as it might have done on Earth. No winds or storms, lightnings or floods could trouble it, while the multiformed monsters of antiquity and mythology restored to life, with which the terrestrials had been thrown into such close contact, roamed about its polished walls. Not even the fiercest could affect them, and they would but see themselves reflected in any vain assaults. The domed symmetrical cylinder stood there as a monument to human ingenuity and skill, and the travellers' last thought as they fell asleep was, man is really lord of creation. They then fly over mountains and the coast. They name Deep Waters Bay and Funnel Bay and Bearwarden Peninsula, and discover a vast waterfall bigger than anything on Earth. Eventually they reach the northern pole, and there blast a hole through the ice to measure the temperature. Taking off again, they see that the bands of Jupiter are the ocean, its colour changing with the latitude. And of course there is the Great Red Spot. Their next object of interest was the Great Red Spot. It proved, as Cortlandt had predicted, to be a continent, with at that time no special colour, though they easily recognised it by comparing its outlines with those of the spot in the map. Its length, as they already knew, was 27,000 miles, and its breadth about 8,000 miles, so that it contained more square miles than the entire surface of the Earth, land and water included. "It is clear," said Cortlandt, "that at some season of Jupiter's long year a change takes place that affects the colour of the leaves, some drought or prolonged norther, for it is obvious that that is the simplest explanation. In like manner, we may expect that at some times more white spots will move across the ocean than at others." Such confidence! Ah, sweet summer child! Someone once said the knowledgeable scientist of today is the fool of tomorrow. If only they could be less certain of their conclusions today, then perhaps they would look less laughable later. Their explorations of Jupiter complete, our adventurers depart for Saturn, a journey of 4 days. And it is on Saturn that things start to get a bit weird. They have barely stepped out onto the surface of Saturn when they have shot dead 2 large white birds. This probably shouldn't surprise any reader, given our hero's path of death and destruction on Jupiter. On doing so, though, the plentiful mushrooms they had noted vanish, as if having never existed. They also notice a strange humming sound, as that of bees, or like the murmuring of prayers in a resonant cathedral, to quote from the text. They become convinced there are other people present amongst them, but invisible. An invisible hand writes a passage in Latin on notepaper, "Absorpta est moros in victoria," and then an old man appears before them, claiming to be a bishop who died before the American Civil War, and that Saturn is where spirits go after death. Crikey. He answers the questions asked by a remarkably chilled-out trio, such as, will the fountain of youth ever be discovered? Is there any limit to human progress on the Earth? And this one is an absolute stunner, why did the angel with the sword of flame drive Adam from the tree of life, since with his soul he had received that which could never die? I must admit, that last question has never really bothered me, and it probably wouldn't be the first thing I would ask someone from beyond the grave. But, you see, on Saturn, the author goes metaphysical, with a thick lather of Christian religiosity. Our adventurers resume their exploration and their shooting, because that's what you do whilst on the surface of a Saturn inhabited by the dead. They discover there are dragons on Saturn, and our fearless but not very sensible heroes go after them, only to end up in a firefight. They are saved only by Providence, who is probably losing patience with them by now, and as they rest, they watch mushrooms vanish. I did warn you this was going to get weird. Errol sleeps and dreams he is visited, first by Violet, a girl he once knew but who has subsequently died, and then by a guardian angel, and then a flower tells him, "Thy thoughts and acts are a pleasure to me. Thou hast raised no idols within thy heart. Thy name is now in the book of life. Continue as thou hast begun, and thou shalt live and reign forever." Okay, but it seems Cortlandt and Bearwarden have similar dreams, warning them against skepticism and materialism. They see more wonders, and Errol strings 2 copper wires between 2 trees. and the wind blowing through them speaks with the voice of Violet, with whom he talks of love, death, and the nature of her present existence. Our three adventurers meet again with the dead bishop, and he speaks of a ninth planet beyond Neptune, called Cassandra, which takes 1,000 years to orbit the sun and is the domain of the damned in hell. Sounds lovely. He also talks of a great star in the centre of the universe called Cosmos. On being asked to do so, he gives Cortlandt a vision of the latter's own funeral and grave. Errol later goes off alone to collect Macintoshes from the Callisto, but is too late and gets caught out in the rain. He shelters inside a fallen tree trunk, and there he has another dream in which he is on Earth and apparently invisible as he watches his fiancée. He realizes he is dead and is overwhelmed by despair. He goes into a church and hears a sermon and wonders why he is so unhappy. Cortlandt and Bearwarden meanwhile go out searching for him and discover his body in the tree trunk. They summon the dead bishop and he revives Errol, who is now very keen on going home, and so our heroes bid Saturn farewell and return to Earth. The world of AD 2000. So, that is the story presented in A Journey to Other Worlds, as written in 1894. But how well did John Jacob Astor IV predict the world of the year 2000? Well, many of the technologies and trends that appear in the novel would have been in the ether at the time of the writing of A Journey to Other Worlds, but the author did choose to include them, to his credit. We find colour photography, wind turbines, electric cars and electric ships, aeroplanes, the total spread of the metric system, the ubiquity of aluminium, and railways that use magnetic forces to propel their trains. There is even live television, as described in the text. Those looking through a kintograph, a visual telegraph terminating in a cameo obscura on the shores of Balfin Bay, were able to see engineers and workmen waving. Politically, the world seems to have been carved up between the United States and England, with the continental European countries falling to socialism. All the countries of Central and South America, as well as Canada, have formally joined the United States. I wonder how they would get all those stars on the Stars and Stripes. Maybe they just have a bigger flag. The most bizarre aspect of Astor's story is the Terrestrial Access Straightening Company, which is already working its geo-engineering ambitions on the Earth. As the president of the company, Colonel Bearwarden, says, "Blessed are they that shall inherit the earth. We are the instruments destined to bring about the accomplishment of that prophecy. For never in the history of the world has man reared so splendid a monument to his own genius as he will in straightening the axis of the planet. No one need henceforth be troubled by sudden change, and every man can have perpetually the climate he desires. Northern Europe will again luxuriate in a climate that favoured the elephants that roamed in northern Asia and Switzerland. To produce these animals and the food they need, it is not necessary to have great heat, but merely to prevent great cold, half the summer's sun being absorbed in melting the winter's accumulation of ice." Elephants roaming in Switzerland? Is there something the Swiss haven't told us? What are you hiding, Switzerland? But back to the book, for this is not the limit of their ambitions. Bearwarden goes on. "I suggest we blow up the Aleutian Isles and enlarge Bering Strait, so as to allow what corresponds to the Atlantic Gulf Stream in the Pacific to enter the Arctic archipelago, which I have calculated will raise the average temperature of that entire region about 30 degrees, thereby still further increasing the amount of available land." I wonder, do these potentially catastrophic ambitions remind you of anyone? Concluding remarks. But now, let's head towards the conclusion. John Jacob Astor IV was about 29 when A Journey to Other Worlds was published, and its heavy reliance on long technical passages suggests a science enthusiast rather than a storyteller. There are also a great many examples of British English spellings in the novel, rather than American English. For example, the word railway is used far more often than railroad, and aeroplane instead of airplane. Of course, this might be down to the edition that I read, rather than a reflection of the original text as written. His picture of the year 2000 is both wildly fantastical and vaguely familiar. The scale of the Earth-tilting project is, happily, far beyond what we are currently capable of, and I personally like the passage of the seasons. The political map is not correct, and would Brazil, Chile and Venezuela really want to become part of the United States, ruled over from Washington DC? Would Canada? On the other hand, the technology has its modern counterparts, particularly the visual telegraph and the increased reliance on wind energy, for better or for worse. So overall, I call A Journey to Other Worlds a strange science fiction fantasy that might make a bizarre but imaginative motion picture. It does, after all, have lots of shooting in it.